Hey guys, how's it going? This is Natinator, and welcome back to part 2 of the series titled On a Hill. Things keep getting more interesting as we go along, so let's do this. Now, as always, turn out the lights, get comfortable, and let the story continue. 3. I sat transfixed, the words flowing from John in stuttering fashion, yet with a conviction and reality which I found difficult to ignore, regardless of my skepticism. This man believed with every fibre of his being that what he had told me was the truth. Dale had apparently went after him, against the wishes of the other villagers. He had long ago lost a son, and did not wish for anyone else to succumb to the apparent malevolence of the hillside. The landlord, being an old friend of the farmers, eventually gave in, and both men travelled to the foot of the hill in the hopes that John would find their light in the darkness, follow it, and be the first to escape from there in living memory. No matter how much they wished to help, though, they would not dare touch that gate, nor cross the hill's threshold. John had to do that on his own, and he did so just as his pursuer leaned over him. I remember letting out a sigh of relief as he finished the last of the wine in front of the fire. There was a moment of silence between us, and I realized that the entire bar was bathed in an anxious reticence, one which was almost tangible, as if those present wanted to speak, but dared not. Finally, I spoke, attempting to be as reassuring as possible. "That is an amazing story, John, but it is just a story. I'm sure there's a rational explanation for it all." He bowed his head gravely, staring at the floor. "If it's just a story, then why can't I leave?" he said, looking up at me with an expression half caught in fear, half trapped in desperation. "What do you mean you can't leave?" "I've been here for 3 months!" he shouted. "I sometimes wish Dale had just left me there." "John," I said, leaning over and resting my hand on his shoulder reassuringly, "you can leave whenever you want." But I could see from his expression that he did not believe me. He had been consumed by whatever myths and superstitions the locals had fed him. I concluded that his psyche had been poisoned. Of course, I felt that the landlord and the others meant well, but I was sure that a conventional explanation would hopefully cure him of his afflicted mind. "I'm going to Glasgow tomorrow," I said cheerfully. "Why not join me? The bus will be here in the afternoon, and we can travel back together. But, of course, I'm forgetting, you have your car with you. Please don't think I was fishing for a lift." I laughed, but John just stared at me grimly, then answered, "My car is sitting out back, wrecked." "Really? I hope it's not too bad. What happened?" "It took me several days to recover after my experience on the hill," he said mournfully, before continuing. "But when I felt up to it, I packed my bags, thanked Dale and the landlord, then drove out of the village. A couple of miles into my journey, the rain came down in sheets. Visibility was terrible, but I just wanted to leave. I lost control of the car and went straight into a tree. I survived, but the car is a write-off. Well, accidents happen, as long as you're okay. How about another drink? I said, standing up. As I did so, John grabbed my arm forcefully. It was no accident. There was something else on that road. I saw him standing there. A man, I think. At least, it appeared like a man. I swerved to avoid him. And a good thing, too. The last thing you would want around here would be to accidentally kill a local. My jokes once more did not appease his frustrations. I sat back down as he conveyed to me his predicament. After the incident with the car, which was towed back to the inn by Dale, John tried everything he could to leave. Each time he attempted to use the local bus, there would be a problem. It would break down, or there would be a landslide stopping it from entering the village. He even claimed that was why I'd been stranded overnight, because he had intended to take the bus again that day. The man was adamant. For 3 months, he had been a guest at the Laird of Dungorth, and yet, no matter how he tried, he could not leave the outskirts of the village. Sometimes, he had even tried to hike to the nearest town, but on each occasion, he was beaten back by bitter and perilous weather, which appeared without warning. He'd even tried to phone for help, but his mobile phone seemed to have no signal, while using a landline resulted in continuous static. The same applied for anyone who tried to make a call on his behalf. While I could not explain everything that had happened, I was certain that a series of rational and conventional events could account for each. It seemed madness that someone so obviously intelligent and articulate be made to believe such nonsense. I genuinely felt sympathy for the man. You are the victim of a self-fulfilling prophecy, I said confidently. What do you mean? John replied. I've worked in many villages like this. You come to an old part of the country with a haunting landscape. It seems like another world compared to the modern life of London. Then you're provided with paranoia fuel, a myth that the locals believe about a cursed part of the land. Taking all that in, you have some terrible luck hitting a tree with your car, and before you know it, you believe the whole thing. Perhaps you even imagined the figure on the road. Maybe even the whole encounter. What about the hill? He asked, obviously intrigued by any possibility that escape could be achieved. Probably a placebo effect from all the stories you've heard. That, or, who knows, maybe you had food poisoning or a virus of some kind and hallucinated the entire thing. Maybe there's even some nut up there living in that church. It was obvious that he remained unconvinced, but I felt that it was my duty to take this poor soul out of that village, back to Glasgow, where he could hopefully make some arrangements to get home. I'd seen the damage that unfounded beliefs could cause amongst people and communities before, and I was genuinely appalled by it. I just wanted to help. Tomorrow, we'll get the bus together, and I'll buy you a pint in Glasgow. He never said much in return, other than nodding his head reluctantly in agreement. 4. The next day, I rose early with a singular purpose. While I had to get home to work on my assignment, the bus was not due until the early evening, which gave me just enough time to persuade John to come with me in the most dramatic of fashions, to go to the hill myself. I knew that if I returned without any of these strange experiences, that perhaps he would forget about the superstitious nonsense which the villagers had afflicted him with, and leave on the bus with me. I must also confess that I was utterly intrigued by the idea of the place, and while I had absolutely no doubt that John's experiences were mistaken, I actually felt that there might be an article, or even a story in the whole ordeal. As a writer, such opportunities rarely present themselves. Before I left, I spoke with him and made my intentions clear. He pleaded with me not to go, that his fate need not be mine. But after much protestation, he accepted that I would not be dissuaded, and reluctantly agreed that should I return without paranormal, supernatural, or otherworldly incidents, that he would leave for Glasgow with me. After providing me with directions, ones which I was sure would not be forthcoming from the villagers, I made my way out to the supposedly tainted hillside. I must admit that when I first saw it at first, it did appear odd to me, misplaced somehow, but again, I counted this as the subconscious effect of John's tale. The environment appeared to be just as he had described. At least that much was accurate. The road was blocked with rubble and rubbish, and I too found the wooden gate lying at the foot of the hillside. There was even a stain of blood upon it, certainly making the conclusion of his story more believable. The thought of some maniac up there did give me pause. But even if someone had chased John through the undergrowth, they'd probably moved on after being confronted by Dale and the landlord. In any case, a badly wounded John had been able to escape, so I felt confident that I would be fine. I did not feel anything out of the ordinary as I crossed the threshold, and while the tangled weave of trees and dead grass did provide feelings of decay, I was surprised by just how innocuous and commonplace the environment felt. After climbing the steep path which clearly had been used numerous times in recent years, I reached a spot which was reminiscent of John's descriptions. And there it was, obscured from the world by a wall of leaves, rotting wood and grass. The church. I was significantly surprised, as I had thought such a building would surely have been part of John's hallucinations, and I concede that I began to feel slightly unnerved by its existence, and hesitated for a moment before proceeding. I'm embarrassed to say that, had the area not been illuminated by the morning light, I may have even considered retreating, but I did not. The church was fascinating, and I, at the very least, wished to see if it was as John had said, with an altar undisturbed inside. It wasn't difficult to gaze inward, though I shuddered slightly remembering the description of the door being partially blocked by debris, yet it lay wide open, unimpeded, and this discrepancy did give me pause once more. Yet, there I stood, at the threshold peering in. It was exactly as he had described, the floor strewn with rubble from a failing roof, the altar raised up ahead, An inscription, which by now I had no doubt did indeed read as John had stated, and the doorway leading downstairs to an unknown destination. You must understand that at no point did I genuinely think that something supernatural resided there. The very idea seemed laughable, but I did begin to question my safety. Thoughts of a hermit or mentally deranged recluse living under a remote church did not fill me with confidence. "Hello? Is anyone there?" I shouted, my voice echoing up toward the rafters above. With no reply, I castigated myself for being so paranoid and stepped inside. Carefully I negotiated the rubble, noticing droplets of blood on a broken piece of wood, which I assumed were John's. Thoughts of blood poisoning now entered my mind. Perhaps the wound in his side caused the hallucinations. At least, the ones which occurred afterwards. That could have explained his disorientation. The altar stood as he had stated. Realizing that I may need to prove that I had been there to reassure the man, I took out my phone and started taking pictures of the church interior. With each flash, the whole lit up, and as it did, my mind crept back to John's descriptions of a zealous priest and a fearful congregation huddled under the protection of the church. But protected from what? Turning to the darkened doorway which led underneath the building, I felt my heart begin to race at the prospect of descending the stone staircase. But I was compelled to, although not for entirely altruistic intentions. Yes, I did want to show John that there was nothing down there, and that the beliefs which seemed to hold him paralyzed within the boundaries of the village were unsubstantiated. But I also wanted to know what lay beneath myself. Why did this church have a subterranean level? Was there a crypt? My curiosity piqued, and my mouth watered at the possibility of a published article describing my discovery, of an unknown archaeological find, with perhaps an important and valuable relic or two within. As I approached the door, I could feel the cold air breathing from below. Using the light from my phone, I calmed my nerves, which had begun to grate on me, and looked cautiously inside. A steep and narrow flight of stairs dripped down into the ground beneath. The walls were dark and grey, and seemed to have been carved or formed with far less care than the rest of the church. I shouted down there once more, but again no one replied, and I therefore assumed the place to be abandoned. As I descended, I was surprised by just how long the staircase actually was. By the time I reached its conclusion, I estimated that I was at least 50 feet beneath the old church. It appeared peculiar to me that a level would be so far beneath the ground, and questioned to myself the purpose of it. Why had the architects, builders, or followers of the church dug so deep? At the last step, I composed myself and turned to face a darkened doorway at the conclusion of the staircase. The blue light from my phone illuminated everything around. What I saw deeply disturbed me. A large room, the floor littered with rags, stone, and human bones. I could not tell how many bodies had been left to rot there, for they were too numerous. The chill in the air was pronounced, and I felt frozen to the core, not just by the cold of the stone which surrounded me, but by the sorrowful feeling I felt inside. It was almost as if I could imagine people huddled down there, spending their last moments hidden from the sun. The very impression I had was that they had died there, yet I did not know why I was so convinced of this. Taking a few pictures, I then entered what I can only describe as a mass grave. I was careful to not disturb the bones, but I am ashamed to say that I felt the crunch of a few underfoot. To the right lay a doorway leading into another chamber, and while I did not wish to disturb the tomb any more than I already had, I felt compelled to know the entire story. That is, what else was down there? Above the doorway sat a stone cherub, carved with a degree of artistic flair, putting it at odds with the room full of bones, but the childlike face wore a strange grin upon it, not of joy or playfulness, but of taunting and sadomasochistic indulgence. The very sight of it left me with a feeling of revulsion, and so I quickly entered the other chamber to be removed from its gaze. Inside was a large room, much grander than the one before. I could immediately tell that something of importance to those who had built the church had once been housed here. The walls were adorned with beautifully carved symbols, some Christian, but many of a nature I could not identify. In the center of the room lay a block of solid stone 3 feet across. A large hole lay to its side. On the rock was the following inscription: "Here lies the Father, loved by some, hated by many." As I pondered the epitaph, I peered into the hole. The grave was vacant, but I was glad that I had seen it before walking around the room. It was deep and wide enough to have given me a nasty fall. Being stranded down there with a broken leg was not something that I wished to consider. The dirt inside the grave was stained black by what looked like a deposit of charcoal throughout, and the fringe of the hole was surrounded by a circular pile of dust. I assumed that grave robbers, or perhaps those who had hated the man, had removed his body long ago. The air of the place was beginning to affect me intensely. Each breath inward was jagged and cold, and the discomfort was such that I decided I had seen enough. While taking a few pictures to document the tomb before leaving, the flash from my phone brought something on the floor into sharp focus. Covered in earth and dirt lay a book which poked out slightly from the ground. Gently blowing the dust from it, I carefully lifted it up, resting the book on top of the makeshift gravestone. The binding was ancient, peeling slightly as I ran my hand over it. The dark red cover, which I could not identify the material out of which it had been made, spoke of time gone by and of stories lost, yet important. Deep down, I knew that such an item should be removed carefully and studied by scholars, but as a writer, my passion for a story compelled me to see what it contained. Opening it, I was amazed. This was a chronicle. a handwritten account of the history of the church, its congregation, and the hillside. A snapshot of a people long since forgotten. It was written in a linguistically confused tone, as the wording seemed to be a mix of Old Scots English and phrases in a language unfamiliar to me, one which I assumed to be Celtic or Gaelic in origin. However, the passages in Old Scots I could read to a degree. What follows is a loose recollection of what had been inscribed there.